The desert stretched out like a vast sea of gold and brown. Endless in every direction, the ground baked hard under the sun's relentless gaze. The air shimmered with heat, and every movement of the wind stirred up tiny spirals of dust that danced across the barren landscape. It was the kind of place where life clung stubbornly to existence, where cacti and twisted mesquite trees grew in stubborn isolation, and the occasional rock formation jutted like the bones of some ancient, long-dead creature. Birds called out from far above, their cries echoing against the cliffs that rose like silent sentinels on the horizon. Amid this harsh expanse, a young woman moved with caution and determination. Her boots crunched over the dry, uneven soil, the leather soles worn smooth by travel. She carried a small satchel slung across her shoulder, its contents light but essential: water, a few scraps of food, a knife carefully sheathed at her belt, and a small bundle of personal belongings. Her dark hair, tied loosely at the nape of her neck, caught the sun in streaks of copper, and her eyes alert, wary, and reflective scanned the horizon constantly. She had been walking for hours, guided by instinct and the occasional faded trail marked by travelers long gone. She knew the desert could be unforgiving, and one misstep could mean dehydration, exposure, or worse. Her path had led her to a river, a rare artery of life cutting through the parched landscape. The sound of flowing water, even from a distance, was a balm to her senses, promising refreshment and a momentary reprieve from the heat. The river itself was modest but alive. Its waters were clear, reflecting the pale blue of the sky above. Small fish darted beneath the surface, and reeds lined the banks, swaying gently in the breeze. Along the edges, the sand was soft and damp, cool beneath her tired feet. She paused, dropping her satchel to the ground and kneeling to scoop water into her hands. She drank deeply, feeling the liquid travel down her throat like a surge of life itself. It was a rare comfort in a land that tested endurance and spirit at every turn. As she rested, she became aware of the subtle sounds that spoke of life beyond. Her own footsteps, the rustle of leaves, the distant call of a hawk, the gentle lapping of water against stones. But there was something else too, almost imperceptible at first, the faint echo of movement along the opposite bank. A shadow shifting between the reeds, a silhouette that did not belong to the birds or the wind. Her heart stirred uneasily, and she rose slowly, instinctively scanning the area with a careful, measured gaze. The desert had taught her many lessons: how to read the land, how to anticipate danger, and how to remain invisible when needed. She moved with quiet efficiency, settling behind a cluster of boulders near the river's edge. From this vantage, she could watch without being seen, the flowing water providing both cover and camouflage. The landscape was not just a backdrop. It was an active participant in her survival, offering protection and warning alike. Though the day was hot and the sun harsh, a sense of calm lingered within her. She had faced solitude before, and while it could be intimidating, it had also sharpened her awareness and resilience. Her mind wandered briefly to the path that had brought her here, the small town she had left, the uncertain journey ahead, and the people she had encountered along the way. Each step in the desert carried a story, each landmark a memory etched into her mind. Yet despite her experiences, she remained alert, knowing that danger often arrived quietly, without warning, and that the river, serene as it seemed, could not guarantee safety. The setting itself seemed alive in its contrasts. The river represented life and vulnerability, flowing gently in a world otherwise harsh and unyielding. The cliffs and rocks surrounding it were silent watchers, indifferent yet protective, offering vantage points to those who knew how to use them. The wind, sometimes fierce, sometimes gentle, carried whispers of the land's secrets. Every element interacted, forming a delicate balance between exposure and shelter, danger and reprieve. As she paused, drawing in a deep breath, the young woman felt a mixture of awe and respect for the desert. It was beautiful, cruel, and uncompromising, all at once. Here, every step mattered, every choice counted, and every glance could reveal life or peril. The river's quiet presence offered a momentary sanctuary, but she knew it was fleeting. Soon, she would resume her journey, carrying the lessons of the land with her, aware that the desert watched, waiting, and that even in moments of calm, the next challenge might be just around the bend. In that fragile, suspended moment, the desert and the river formed a world unto themselves, timeless, powerful, and alive. She knelt once more to touch the water, feeling its coolness against her skin, and for the first time that day allowed herself a breath of relief. Yet in the distance, a faint rustle of movement reminded her that even in beauty, vigilance was never optional. The desert's quiet was deceptive. What had felt like a moment of calm at the river's edge now seemed fragile. A thin veneer stretched over the undercurrent of danger. The young woman had just set her satchel down to refill her canteen when subtle disturbances in the environment began to prick at her instincts. The desert had a way of speaking to those who listened, and her senses, sharpened by solitude and experience, picked up something she could not ignore. From the opposite bank, movement broke the delicate rhythm of the reeds swaying in the wind. At first, it was barely perceptible. The quick glint of sunlight off a knife, the rustle of footsteps too deliberate to belong to an animal. She froze, her body tensing as she scanned the horizon. 3 men emerged, their shapes tall and menacing. Against the brightness of the desert, they moved with a purpose that betrayed malice. Their eyes locked on her as though they had been waiting for this moment. Her heartbeat quickened, not from panic but from recognition of the danger she faced. The desert had taught her to distinguish between ordinary travelers and those whose presence carried threat. These men fit the latter category. Their posture, the way they carried themselves, the slight smirk twisting at the corners of their mouths, it was a silent warning. She knew instinctively that they were predators, drawn to her solitude by the promise of vulnerability. They advanced slowly at first, their movements deliberate, trying to mask the threat, but the young woman was not naive. She had learned that such gestures often preceded violence. Every step they took along the soft sand was measured, calculated, designed to intimidate. She tightened her grip on the small knife at her belt, feeling the familiar cold steel against her palm, a thin line of defense against the unknown. Her mind raced through possibilities, escape routes, natural barriers, and the small advantages the terrain might offer. The men began to speak, their voices low and mocking, carrying across the river's narrow span. Their words were laced with cruelty, intended to unsettle her, to make her doubt her strength. One of them stepped closer to the water's edge, his shadow stretching long and threatening over the sunlit sand. The woman stepped back instinctively, pressing herself against a cluster of rocks for partial cover. Her heart pounded, not with fear alone, but with the sharp clarity that comes when survival is immediate. Despite their intimidation, she refused to show weakness. Her eyes locked on theirs, steady and unflinching. She understood that fear, if visible, could embolden them further. Every small detail mattered: the angle of her stance, the subtle shift of weight, the way her gaze met theirs without faltering. She had faced isolation and danger before, and though the desert had been cruel, it had never broken her spirit. She drew on that resilience now, even as the men closed the distance. The desert around her seemed to react to the tension, the wind, picking up slightly, sending ripples across the river and stirring the reeds like a warning. The sun glinted off the rocks, casting sharp shadows that could either conceal or betray her movements. She noted the environment carefully, aware that each feature could become an alley or a trap. The river, calm and serene, offered a temporary shield, but it could not stop the approaching threat. The three men, emboldened by their numbers, underestimated her. They spoke to each other in low, cruel whispers, calculating their next move with the arrogance of those who think power lies solely in physical domination. Yet they did not account for her alertness, for the quiet intelligence honed by months of solitary travel in unforgiving landscapes. She began to shift subtly, testing the space between herself and the attackers, measuring the reach of the sand, the rocks, the water, and the reeds. Time seemed to stretch, each heartbeat echoing. Like a drum in the stillness, she could sense the tension radiating from the men, the confidence that came from anticipating weakness. But she also sensed hesitation, a flicker of uncertainty they tried to mask. Her presence, calm yet determined, unsettled them. She was not a passive target, and even in silence, her courage spoke volumes. Suddenly, the atmosphere changed. A faint sound, almost like the cry of a hawk or the whisper of wind over stone, pierced the tension. The men paused, their eyes darting nervously toward the cliffs above the river bank. Something unseen had entered the scene, something that made them hesitate, their previous confidence shaken. The young woman did not know what it was, but she felt a glimmer of hope, a sign that she might not be alone in this confrontation. The river bank, once a place of temporary respite, had become a stage for an imminent confrontation. Every element of the environment, the sun, the rocks, the water, the wind, was now a participant in the unfolding drama. The predators had made their presence known, their intentions clear, and she, standing at the edge of vulnerability, prepared herself to face the first real test of courage in this journey, knowing that survival demanded not just skill, but awareness, composure, and perhaps a stroke of fate. In that suspended moment, the desert seemed to hold its breath. The three men approached, confident yet wary, while the young woman stood poised, ready to defend herself in any way the harsh land allowed. The calm of the river, the beauty of the desert, and the warmth of the sun all contrasted sharply with the danger at hand, marking the beginning of a trial that would test more than physical strength. It would test resolve, courage, and the arrival of an unexpected force that might turn the tide. The young woman's pulse raced, a steady rhythm beneath the surface of her calm exterior, as the three men closed the distance along the riverbank. Every instinct honed by solitary travel in the desert screamed at her to run, to flee, to vanish into the harsh landscape that had once been both a sanctuary and a teacher. Yet her feet remained rooted, her stance deliberate, her mind calculating every possible move. Fear surged within her like a sudden storm, but it was tempered by an equally powerful force, defiance. She knew that giving in to panic would be as dangerous as surrendering to them. Her life depended on clarity, on the ability to assess the men's intentions, their weaknesses, and the environment around her. The desert had taught her that fear was not an enemy. It was a tool, a signal of danger meant to sharpen awareness. She allowed herself to feel it, to acknowledge it, but she would not let it paralyze her. Each heartbeat became a metronome, a measure of her control over the situation. The three men, emboldened by the assumption of her helplessness, began to circle slightly, attempting to flank her, their expressions twisted with cruel anticipation. One stepped closer, his shadow stretching across the sunlit sand, and he spoke in a voice meant to intimidate, taunting her with words that were venomous in their simplicity. But she met his gaze without faltering, her dark eyes steady and unwavering. There was a defiance there that he had not expected, a spark of strength that made him hesitate for just a fraction of a second. That fraction was enough. She shifted subtly, pressing herself against the cluster of rocks at the river's edge, moving just enough to gain partial cover while keeping the men in her sight. Her small knife, resting at her belt, was a lifeline, a symbol of her unwillingness to submit. It was not just a weapon. It was a declaration. She would not be taken without a fight. Her fingers brushed the cool leather handle, grounding her. In the reality of her power, small though it might seem against the looming threat, fear and defiance coexisted in her chest, a delicate balance that required constant attention. She knew that the men would test her patience, pushing forward with intimidation and force. Their confidence came not from skill but from sheer assumption that a lone woman in a harsh landscape could be overpowered. She would not allow them the satisfaction. Every movement, every breath, every glance was a silent message. She was aware, prepared, and unwilling to yield. The wind rustled through the reeds, carrying faint whispers of the river's current and masking the subtle sounds of her own shifting stance. She used this to her advantage, making herself a part of the landscape, blending fear and courage into a single potent presence. The men advanced cautiously, unnerved by her unwavering demeanor, yet unwilling to retreat. Their confusion became apparent in the way they glanced at each other, seeking reassurance that she was truly alone and vulnerable. She considered her surroundings carefully. The river, though shallow, could serve as both barrier and trap. The rocks provided cover, though limited. Every detail mattered: the angle of sunlight, the shadows it cast, the way the sand shifted underfoot. Her mind raced through scenarios, imagining each possible action the men might take, each response she could give. She did not plan to surrender. She planned to survive, and survival required more than courage. It required cleverness. The men stepped too close, his arrogance clouding his judgment. He reached forward, attempting to intimidate her with physical proximity. Her hand tightened around the knife, and she made a sudden sharp step backward, planting her foot firmly against the rock behind her. It was a statement of readiness, a small but deliberate act of defiance. She was not frozen, she was poised. She would not be a passive target, not when every muscle and every thought could contribute to her defense. In the silent tension that followed, the desert itself seemed to respond. The river flowed steadily. The wind whispered across the reeds, and the rocks provided both concealment and strength. Fear still coursed through her veins, but it was now tempered with focus. The men's confidence wavered. They sensed the difference between prey and someone who refused to yield. Her defiance was a shield as real as any stone or blade, radiating from her like heat from the sun. The young woman stood tall, despite the tremor of adrenaline in her chest. She knew the confrontation had only begun, that the danger was real and immediate. But she also knew this: fear was not weakness, and defiance was not arrogance, it was survival. She would face whatever came next with the strength she had carried through countless trials, drawing courage from the desert itself, from the river, and from the knowledge that even in solitude she was not without power. In that suspended moment, the river bank became more than a place of vulnerability. It became a stage of resilience. She faced the advancing men with unwavering resolve, her knife a symbol of defiance, her gaze a silent challenge. She was alone, but she was not helpless. Fear was present, yes, but it was harnessed, sharpened, and transformed into a weapon as vital as any blade. And as the men approached, believing their victory inevitable, they would soon discover that courage, determination, and defiance could stand against even the darkest intent. High atop the jagged cliffs overlooking the river, a figure moved with the grace and precision of someone perfectly attuned to the land. The Apache warrior had been tracking the desert's rhythms for years, understanding its subtle signals as if they were spoken words. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, scanned the river below with an intensity born of experience. He had sensed the disturbance long before the young woman at the water's edge had realized the threat. The desert spoke in whispers, rustling reeds, shifting sands. Distant footsteps, and he listened. From his vantage point, he could see the three men advancing along the riverbank. Their intentions were as clear to him as the patterns of the sun in the sky. They believed themselves predators and the young woman alone prey. But the warrior had learned that arrogance often led to failure. The desert did not favor the careless. He crouched low, the earth beneath him cool despite the sun's heat, blending seamlessly with the rocky outcrop. Each movement was deliberate, measured, and silent. His presence was invisible, a shadow among shadows. He studied the young woman below. She was poised, knife in hand, aware of the danger encroaching upon her. Yet she lacked the numbers and strength to fend off three men, determined to overpower her. Her courage was evident. She had not fled, but it was courage balanced precariously with vulnerability. He knew instinctively that without intervention, the outcome could be disastrous. The warrior's pulse remained steady, his mind mapping the path of approach, calculating how best to intervene without alerting the men prematurely. The three attackers moved with slow, menacing steps, their focus entirely on their intended victim. They exchanged whispered plans, oblivious to the figure observing them from above. The warrior's eyes narrowed. He had faced men like these before, reckless, cruel, and convinced of their dominance. Experience had taught him that underestimating someone defending themselves or underestimating the land itself could be fatal. He adjusted his stance slightly, readying for the moment when intervention would be necessary. Time seemed to stretch. The young woman's breath came in measured, controlled bursts, her movements subtle but deliberate, positioning herself as best as she could behind the rocks. The warrior noted every small gesture, every shift in weight, every flicker of fear mingled with determination. He understood her strategy even without words. She was buying time, preparing for whatever force might come to her aid, whether human or natural. Her defiance resonated with him, a quiet testament to her will to survive. The men paused near the river's edge, emboldened by their assumptions and unaware of the eyes upon them. One of them leaned slightly forward, the faint glint of a blade catching the sunlight. It was a dangerous moment, the kind that could escalate with deadly speed. The warrior inhaled slowly, centering himself, knowing that action must be precise. If he moved too soon, the men might react violently toward the woman. If he waited too long, the consequences could be irreparable. He began his descent from the cliff with deliberate care, using rocks and sparse vegetation for cover. Each movement was silent, calculated, minimizing disturbance while closing the Fausen. Distance. The desert itself seemed to assist him, offering shadows and natural concealment. Every step brought him closer to the riverbank, closer to the moment when intervention would tip the scales. He remained unseen, a ghost poised to protect without hesitation. As he approached the base of the cliff, the wind shifted slightly, carrying faint whispers of his presence to the men below, but only faintly, easily dismissed in the midst of their predatory focus. The warrior's hand rested lightly on the haft of his weapon, a symbol of both defense and authority. He knew that confrontation might be inevitable, but his strategy was rooted in control, surprise, and the intimate knowledge of the terrain. He would act decisively, ending the threat before it could escalate further. The young woman, still crouched behind the rocks, sensed a subtle change in the air. She could not see him yet, but there was something different, a faint, almost imperceptible tension that suggested she was no longer alone in the desert. Hope flickered briefly in her chest, mingling with caution. She had no idea who or what approached, only that the balance of power might shift. From his vantage, the warrior assessed the final moment, weighing the men's confidence against the woman's courage and the advantage of surprise. He understood the danger they posed, the cruelty that drove them, and the urgency required to protect the innocent. In that suspended instant, the desert seemed to hold its breath, the river flowing silently and the reeds swaying in quiet anticipation. The stage was set for an intervention that would not just prevent harm, but assert the presence of justice. Skill and unwavering resolve. Every instinct, every learned movement, every detail of the landscape guided him. The warrior was ready, silent, and patient. The three men believed they controlled the moment, but the desert had another guardian, one whose eyes saw beyond appearances, whose hands could act with precision, and whose presence could alter fate. In an instant dot, and so he waited, watchful, poised, the embodiment of calm power, ready to intervene at the exact moment that would ensure the young woman's safety and confront the threat that had dared to approach her. The moment hung suspended, taut as a drawn bow. The three men had advanced too far to retreat easily, their confidence still evident, yet a subtle shift in the air made them uneasy. From the edge of the rocks and reeds, a sudden movement caught their peripheral vision, swift, silent, and deliberate. Before they could fully comprehend it, the Apache warrior had emerged from the shadows, his presence like a force of the desert itself, silent, unstoppable, and commanding. He landed lightly on the sand, his feet barely disturbing. The riverbank, eyes locked on the intruders with the unflinching focus of someone accustomed to danger. The young woman, crouched behind the rocks, froze for a heartbeat, recognizing that help had arrived, but also that the stakes had just escalated. She tightened her grip on her knife, prepared to act if necessary, while simultaneously trusting. The presence of the warrior above her, the men's initial shock, quickly gave way to anger and aggression. One lunged forward, underestimating the speed and skill of the man who had just appeared. But the warrior was ready. With a controlled, fluid motion, he sidestepped the attack and used the man's momentum against him, sending him sprawling across. The sand. The riverbank seemed to pulse with energy, the water reflecting the chaos and the power now in play. The second man raised his weapon, a crude knife, and charged with reckless confidence, thinking sheer force could overpower the unexpected. Defender. The Apache warrior's eyes narrowed. He moved like water flowing around a stone, precise, calm, and unyielding. In a swift series of movements, he deflected the strike, twisted the attacker's arm, and disarmed him with a motion so smooth it seemed effortless. The man cried out, in shock and pain, crashing into the reeds with no room to recover. The third man hesitated, sensing that the balance of power had shifted. His eyes flicked between the young woman and the warrior, uncertainty creeping into his expression. He realized too late that his assumptions about vulnerability had been fatally flawed. The warrior's presence exuded authority, control, and lethal capability, qualities that these men had neither expected nor encountered before. Panic replaced arrogance, clouding his judgment as he clumsily tried to back away. The young woman watched, heart pounding, as the warrior confronted her would-be attackers. She marveled at the fluidity of his movements, the precision of his strikes, and the sheer presence that seemed to dominate the riverbank. Every action he took was deliberate, controlled, and perfectly executed, a testament to years of experience and an intimate understanding of both human behavior and the unforgiving. Landscape. The first attacker scrambled to his feet, desperation replacing bravado. He lunged again, this time with a swing that carried both rage and fear. The warrior anticipated every motion, sidestepping, redirecting, and immobilizing with minimal effort. It was a battle not just of strength, but of skill, strategy, and presence. The men were skilled enough to intimidate the young woman, but they were no match for someone who had honed instinct, precision, and awareness into a single lethal force in the midst of the struggle. The river's gentle flow and the desert's harsh clarity contrasted sharply with the violence unfolding along its edge. The young woman's fear remained, but it had transformed into awe, respect, and gratitude. She understood now that courage alone had not been enough to protect her, but combined with skill, experience, and timely intervention, survival was within reach. The second man, beaten and disarmed, attempted to flee, but the warrior moved with silent decisiveness. He intercepted the man's retreat, using leverage and speed to neutralize him completely. Within moments, two of the attackers lay incapacitated, their earlier confidence replaced by helplessness and shock. The third man, now realizing the futility of resistance, stumbled backward, eyes wide, finally yielding to the inevitability of defeat. The Apache warrior turned to the young woman, his expression calm but alert. The danger had passed, yet the riverbank still carried the tension of what had nearly occurred. The warrior's gaze communicated reassurance. She was safe, at least for now. He did not need words. The intensity of his presence and the decisiveness of his actions spoke volumes. The young woman exhaled slowly, feeling the tension drain from her muscles. The knife in her hand no longer felt like the sole means of survival. She had witnessed the power of experience and mastery. Respect, gratitude, and relief intertwined as she stepped from behind the rocks, her posture still cautious but less tense. She had faced fear and defiance, and now, through the intervention of the warrior, she saw that courage could be matched with skill to protect life and preserve justice. The three men lay defeated, sprawled across the sand, their intentions rendered impotent by the swift and decisive action of the warrior. The river flowed calmly beside them, as if washing away the threat and restoring the natural balance. The reeds swayed in the breeze, the sun glinted off the water, and for the first time in moments, the young woman felt a sense of safety. Apache warrior remained vigilant, scanning the surrounding terrain for any lingering threats. He knew the desert could be deceptive, that danger often lingered where it was least expected. Yet for now, the immediate peril had been neutralized. The riverbank, once a place of potential tragedy, had become a testament to courage, skill, and timely intervention. In that moment, the young woman understood the profound lesson the desert and the warrior had imparted. Fear could be transformed into defiance, courage could withstand threat, and help could arrive when least expected, but only if one remained vigilant, aware, and prepared to act when the moment demanded it. The riverbank had quieted, the violence of moments before giving way to a tense calm. The defeated men lay still, subdued more by shock than injury, their arrogance shattered by the skill and presence of the Apache warrior. The young woman remained where she had stepped out from behind the rocks, her chest rising and falling with the force of lingering adrenaline. Every muscle in her body still hummed with the tension of survival, the memory of danger fresh and vivid in her mind. Yet alongside the fear, a profound sense of relief began to take root. She had survived not by chance, but through a combination of her own vigilance and the timely intervention of someone who moved with the desert's wisdom. The warrior approached, his footsteps deliberate and measured, every movement conveying both caution and reassurance. He knelt briefly beside the woman, scanning the riverbank for any lingering threat. His gaze was calm, yet it carried a weight that made her understand the seriousness of what had just occurred. He did not need to speak. The silence between them was enough to communicate understanding, authority, and the mutual recognition of the danger they had just faced together. Her hands, still trembling slightly, clutched the knife she had brought for protection. She realized now that the weapon had been less about force than about mindset, a symbol of her determination to survive and her refusal to surrender. The warrior's presence, however, had turned potential defeat into victory. Watching him, She understood that skill and experience could amplify courage into decisive action, turning fear into a tool rather than a weakness. For a few moments, neither spoke. The sound of the river flowing gently past them and the rustle of reeds in the breeze were almost deafening in their stark contrast to the violence that had just unfolded. The sun reflected off the water, glittering like scattered gems across the surface, and for the first time since the attack began, the young woman allowed herself to breathe fully. Each inhalation brought relief, each exhalation carried away a fraction of the lingering tension. The warrior finally broke the silence, his voice quiet but firm, carrying the weight of experience without need for explanation. "They are not your concern anymore," he said. The words were simple, yet they resonated deeply, offering both reassurance and a subtle lesson. Survival had not been guaranteed by confrontation alone. It had required patience, observation, and precise action. Fear had been a warning, defiance a shield, and intervention a catalyst for safety. Together, these elements had preserved her life. The young woman nodded, grateful but humbled. She had faced the edge of danger, had tested her courage against true malevolence, and had been aided by the intervention of one who moved with unmatched skill. She realized that survival was never purely an individual endeavor, timing, awareness, and sometimes the presence of another could alter the course of events. Yet she also understood that courage and vigilance had been crucial in allowing that intervention to matter. They remained for a few more minutes, ensuring that the riverbank was secure. The defeated men, disoriented and subdued, were left behind, their intentions thwarted but their presence a stark reminder of the danger that had lurked nearby. The young woman's gaze lingered on them briefly, not with anger, but with a sober acknowledgment of the fragility of life and the consequences of misjudgment. She had been lucky, but luck alone had not saved her. Skill, courage, and awareness had played their roles just as crucially. As the warrior rose, he offered her a slight nod, a silent acknowledgment of her resilience and the role she had played in maintaining her own safety. She felt a deep respect for him, not just for his skill in combat, but for the patience, observation, and wisdom that had allowed him to act decisively at the perfect moment. In his presence, the desert itself seemed alive with quiet authority, a reminder that survival often required harmony with the world around one. The young woman reflected on the experience, her mind replaying each moment in meticulous detail. She had felt fear and defiance, uncertainty and courage, helplessness and determination. Each emotion had shaped her actions, teaching her that survival was as much about mindset as it was about physical ability. She now understood the profound lesson embedded in the confrontation: awareness, preparedness, and respect for both danger and the forces that could intervene were essential for navigating the world. The river flowed steadily beside them, a symbol of continuity and resilience. The warrior remained vigilant, scanning the horizon, while she felt a sense of gratitude that ran deeper than words could express. Their silent companionship, brief as it was, had forged an unspoken bond, a connection born from survival, courage, and the shared recognition of the fragile balance between danger and safety. As they began to move away from the riverbank, the young woman glanced back one last time. The scene of confrontation, now calm, seemed almost unreal, a testament to the power of skill, courage, and timely intervention. She carried with her the lessons of fear tempered by defiance, courage guided by wisdom, and survival strengthened by the presence of those who understood the rhythms of the world. The river, the reeds, and the desert had borne witness to a moment of both danger and salvation, a moment that would remain etched in her memory forever. The young woman settled near the edge of the settlement, the glow of lanterns casting long, comforting shadows around her. She had returned from the riverbank, from the confrontation that had threatened her very life, and yet Despite exhaustion, a sense of clarity began to form within her mind. The events of the day replayed in her memory, the fear, the struggle, the sudden appearance of the Apache warrior, and the decisive confrontation that had saved her. But more than the fear or the adrenaline, it was the lessons woven through. Those moments that began to crystallize. The first lesson was about vigilance. Fear had sharpened her senses when she first sensed the danger by the river, and it had kept her cautious, alert, and ready to respond. It was this vigilance paired with the instinct to hide and defend herself that had given her the precious moments necessary for the warrior to arrive. She realized that survival was never purely about bravery or physical strength. It was about awareness, attentiveness, and the ability to read subtle cues in the environment. Every rustle of the reeds, every shifting shadow, every sound of footsteps had mattered, and the awareness to notice them had made a difference. The second lesson was about courage tempered with prudence. During the confrontation, she had felt a surge of defiance and determination, yet she had also understood the limits of her own abilities. Courage alone had not been enough. It had required judgment, restraint, and the willingness to act strategically. She understood now that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to harness it, to channel it into purposeful action without allowing it to overwhelm reason. That realization, she knew, would guide her in countless future challenges. The third lesson was about the power of skill and experience. Watching the warrior move, she had seen something extraordinary, not brute force, but precision, control, and calm decisiveness. Every motion, every strike, every maneuver had been calculated, practiced, and rooted in deep understanding of both the human body and the environment. She realized that true power lay in mastery of oneself, of one's tools, and of the circumstances surrounding any situation. She felt a newfound respect for those who had trained tirelessly to refine their abilities, and an understanding that skill often bridged the gap between danger and safety. Another lesson was about timing. The warrior had arrived at the exact moment she needed him, not a second too soon or too late. That timing had been the difference between survival and tragedy. Life, she recognized, often depended on the right actions at the right moment, a combination of preparedness, observation, and instinct. It was a humbling realization that even the most courageous individual could be powerless without the convergence of skill, awareness, and timing. She also reflected on the importance of trust and cooperation. Alone, she had faced the threat, with limited means. Yet the presence of the warrior had shifted the balance, demonstrating the value of trust in another's skill and judgment. Survival, she realized, was rarely purely solitary. It was often intertwined with the actions, choices, and abilities of others. Knowing when to rely on others while maintaining personal vigilance was a delicate balance, and one she had learned in those critical moments by the river. Gratitude emerged as another profound lesson. She felt it not only toward the warrior, but also toward the natural world that had borne witness to the confrontation. The river, the reeds, the desert all had played roles in the unfolding events. She had learned to see nature not only as a backdrop, but as an active participant, capable of shaping outcomes and offering guidance to those attuned to its rhythms. Gratitude, she understood, was more than polite acknowledgment, it was recognition of interconnectedness, awareness, and respect. Finally, she recognized the lesson of resilience. The ordeal had tested her physical, emotional, and mental limits, yet she had endured. Fear had been transformed into defiance, helplessness into action, and vulnerability into awareness. Each step of her journey had reinforced the idea that resilience was cultivated through challenge, forged in moments of adversity, and strengthened by reflection. She knew now that survival was not simply about reaching safety, it was about growing stronger through the experience. And carrying the lessons forward, the young woman leaned back, letting the glow of the settlement's lights warm her weary body. She understood that these lessons were not abstract, they were practical tools she could carry into the future. Awareness, courage, skill, timing, trust, gratitude, and resilience were no longer concepts. They were lived truths, etched into her memory by fire, river, and shadow. The confrontation had been terrifying, yet it had also been transformative. As she reflected, she realized the ordeal had reshaped her understanding of herself and the world around her. Danger, she now understood, could reveal both vulnerability and strength, fear and courage, helplessness and mastery. And in the presence of those who had honed their abilities and acted decisively, even the most overwhelming threat could be met and overcome. She resolved to carry these lessons with her always, a quiet compass guiding her through life's uncertain terrain. The river flowed steadily in the distance, the sun now fully set, its gentle sound a reminder that life continued, carrying both challenges and lessons along its path. And she, having faced danger, learned and endured, felt ready to walk forward with newfound strength, wisdom, and resolve. The days after the river incident were marked by quiet reflection and gradual healing. The young woman returned to the rhythms of her daily life, but everything had shifted: her awareness of the world, her understanding of her own courage, and her recognition of the fragility and strength inherent in survival. Every sound, every shadow, every footstep now carried subtle meaning. The lessons she had learned by the river were no longer abstract. They were alive within her, guiding her decisions, shaping her perspective, and influencing the way she moved. Through the world. In the mornings, she would walk along the outskirts of the settlement, retracing familiar paths with a new sense of purpose. Where once she had passed through these spaces unconsciously, she now observed details that had previously escaped her notice: the subtle sway of reeds in the breeze, the patterns of footprints in the dust, the distant cry of a hawk circling overhead. Each observation reminded her of the vigilance that had kept her alive, and she found herself quietly practicing the awareness that had proven so vital. She was learning to trust her instincts, to notice what others might overlook, and to read the world as a living, interconnected system. At the same time, she reflected on the courage that had emerged in her most desperate moments. Fear had not been vanquished. It had been transformed into deliberate action. She understood now that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it, guided by reason and principle. This awareness infused her daily interactions and decisions, helping her confront challenges with measured confidence rather than impulsive recklessness. The memory of the warrior's calm decisiveness became a silent benchmark, a standard she aspired to emulate in her own way. The young woman also began to appreciate the power of preparation and skill. She sought opportunities to learn practical skills: self-defense, situational awareness, and survival techniques, recognizing that knowledge and practice could bridge the gap between vulnerability and safety. Each new skill reinforced her sense of agency, providing tangible reassurance that she was capable of defending herself and navigating dangerous situations. She realized that preparedness was a form of respect for oneself, for life, and for the unpredictable world around her. Her relationships with others deepened as well. She found herself more attuned to subtle cues in people's behavior, more empathetic toward those facing challenges, and more conscious of the value of trust and collaboration. The river incident had underscored the importance of reliance on others when necessary, and she became more deliberate in forming connections built on mutual respect and understanding. She no longer assumed she had to face the world alone, but she also knew the importance of discernment and careful judgment in choosing whom to trust. Gratitude became a guiding principle in her life. Each day, she took time to acknowledge the support, skill, and intervention that had saved her, as well as the natural world that had both tested and sustained her. The river, the desert, the very air she breathed all reminded her of the interconnectedness of existence and the role of unseen forces in shaping outcomes. Gratitude, she realized, was not passive, it was active awareness, a recognition that life's gifts and protections often came in subtle, unexpected ways. As weeks turned into months, she began to share her experience, first cautiously, then more openly. Her story became a lesson not just in survival, but in awareness, courage, and resilience. Others listened, absorbing not only the narrative of danger and rescue, but also the underlying principles she had gleaned: vigilance, preparation, courage, tempered by prudence, trust, and the transformative power of learning from every encounter. In telling her story, she reinforced her own understanding, and she inspired awareness in those around her. The young woman also carried forward a quiet respect for the warrior who had intervened. She knew she would likely never see him again, but his presence remained a profound influence on her thinking and actions. She reflected on the way he had moved with purpose, combining patience, precision, and decisiveness. His example reminded her that skill, experience, and calm judgment were invaluable, and that they could make the difference between life and death. Even in his absence, his lessons guided her. Ultimately, moving forward was about integration, taking the raw, intense experiences of the river, the fear, the adrenaline, the intervention, and transforming them into wisdom that could inform daily life. She learned to navigate her environment with awareness, to approach challenges with courage tempered by judgment, and to engage with others with both trust and discernment. Life continued, but she moved through it differently, carrying the lessons etched into her memory by fire, water, and shadow. The young woman's journey was no longer defined solely by danger. It was defined by growth, resilience, and the conscious application of the knowledge she had gained. She had faced fear and survived, and now she walked forward with intention, carrying a newfound strength and a deep, abiding understanding of the value of awareness, skill, courage, trust, and gratitude. The river had tested her, the desert had challenged her, and the warrior had guided her. And in moving forward, she honored all three, shaping a life informed by survival, insight, and quiet, steady courage. Time passed, and the river incident that had once threatened her life became a defining memory, not of terror alone, but of transformation. The young woman, now stronger, more aware, and deeply reflective, carried the lessons of that day into every aspect of her existence. She had survived an encounter that could have ended in tragedy, and from it emerged not just resilience, but wisdom, a guiding force that reshaped her identity, her choices, and her relationship to the world. The first mark of her transformation was in how she approached challenges. No longer did she move through life passively, reacting only when circumstances demanded it. She had learned that preparation, awareness, and intentional action were essential. In both small and significant decisions, she applied the lessons of vigilance and discernment. She anticipated difficulties, evaluated risks, and trusted her instincts to guide her choices. Danger still existed in the world, as it always had, but she faced it with measured courage rather than paralyzing fear. The memory of the Apache warrior's calm precision remained her benchmark, an enduring reminder that skill and awareness could tip the balance. When life stakes were highest, her relationships deepened and matured. She approached others with empathy, trust, and discernment, understanding the delicate balance between reliance and independence. She saw the value in community and support, appreciating those who offered guidance or assistance without compromising her sense of self. Her encounters with others became richer, imbued with the knowledge that strength could be shared, and that courage was magnified when paired with trust and cooperation. She became someone people naturally sought for insight, calm in crises, and steady counsel. The river, which had once been the stage of fear, became a symbol of reflection and growth. She often returned to its banks, not out of necessity, but to meditate on the journey she had survived. The flowing water reminded her of life's constant movement, its unpredictability, and its quiet resilience. She saw herself mirrored in its currents, sometimes rushing, sometimes calm, always moving forward. Sitting by the river, she reflected on the lessons she had learned: vigilance, courage tempered with prudence, skill, timing, trust, gratitude, and resilience. These were no longer fleeting insights. They had become principles shaping her life. The warrior's impact lingered, a silent legacy. She never forgot the precise moment he had arrived to prevent tragedy, the way his movements combined confidence, awareness, and decisiveness. He had shown her not just the effectiveness of skill, but the profound power of integrity and responsibility. Even in his absence, his actions echoed in her mind, influencing her responses to conflict, her understanding of courage, and her appreciation of those who protect and guide others with selfless dedication. In this sense, the warrior's legacy became a part of her own, shaping her values and ambitions. She also embraced the importance of teaching and sharing her experiences. Over time, she began guiding others, particularly younger members of her community, imparting lessons of awareness, resilience, and courage. She told her story not as a tale of victimhood, but as a testament to preparation, judgment, and the importance of seeking and accepting guidance when needed. Her words inspired vigilance, respect for skill, and mindfulness of the environment. She had turned a personal ordeal into a source of collective wisdom, ensuring that her experience could protect and empower others. Gratitude remained a central force in her life. She acknowledged the help of others, the guidance of the warrior, and the role of the natural world that had shaped her survival. Gratitude, she realized, was not passive, it was active, shaping her perspective and influencing her actions toward others. She cultivated a life rich in awareness and appreciation, seeing the interconnectedness of people, events, and nature, and recognizing that even the smallest moments could hold lessons if observed closely. Perhaps the most profound transformation was internal, a sense of unshakable self-awareness and confidence. She had confronted fear, survived, and emerged not just physically intact, but emotionally and intellectually strengthened. She carried a deep understanding of her own capabilities, a trust in her instincts, and a readiness to act decisively when circumstances demanded it. She no longer feared challenges in the same way. Instead, she met them with calm determination, drawing on the inner strength honed by experience. Years later, when she reflected on the river, the attackers, and the warrior who had saved her, she understood that the event had been more than a moment of survival. It had been a catalyst for transformation. It had forged her resilience, clarified her values, and instilled lessons that shaped her entire life. The river flowed as it always had, indifferent yet constant, while she moved through the world transformed, mindful, courageous, and empowered. In the end, the legacy of that day was not only survival but growth. The young woman had turned trauma into wisdom, fear into awareness, and danger into opportunity for learning. Her life became a testament to the power of vigilance, courage, skill, trust, gratitude, and resilience. The river, the desert, and the memory of the warrior remained with her always, symbols of a journey that had begun with terror and ended in profound transformation. Through her experience, she discovered the enduring truth that true strength emerges not from the absence of fear, but from the conscious, courageous choice to move forward forever changed, yet steadfast in spirit.